Does anyone know how to access the YouTube account? Because I don't have access to it. I have the video from last time, but I don't have the login.
Craig does. Right.
Okay, I'll ping Craig. And I'll get that loaded up.
Since I hit the record button, I might get the email. If I do,
I think I created the invite.
Okay.
I created the meeting to fix the old meeting because the old meeting was owned by someone who left the company, and that's why it wasn't recording anymore.
Good debugging.
But then I was silly enough to create the meeting, so now I have to do the upload.
As a side note, Craig might have a solution to some of these problems.
Oh yeah, that's right. We'll fix it. Okay, so should we get started? I was going to suggest we move Yang Min's topic for after some of the shorter stuff.
Hey Sven, can you go over the release blockers and have that list now?
Yeah, Shriram, you have really bad echo.
Yeah, I can.
Going on with your audio, but you're getting feedback. Yeah, let's go through the release blockers. It's a good idea.
Hey, but before that, I just want to do the announcement and then it can be done.
Oh, all right. Are you on the list? You didn't put yourself on the list.
No, that felt weird, so I just didn't do it.
No, I think we'll have to schedule this out for a couple months in the future, Shriram, and until then, you can't make an announcement. You just have to.
It's too late. I just already unsubscribed myself from all the ownership lists and teams and so on.
Okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
All right. So, I mean, for those who don't know, this will be my very last day in Istio, Envoy, Trade, and all of the other stuff. And so I'm moving on to do something completely different. And so I just wanted to tell people in person, this will be my last TOC meeting, and anything has to do with Istio, Kubernetes, the whole land.
So when you say completely different, does that mean you're getting to general contracting, or?
Still within,
fishing in the North Sea.
Yeah, still within software, but I guess it's not going to be anything related to Kubernetes land. So
Shriram is committed to supporting the Envoy filter API into perpetuity.
No way. No. I've put spam blockers for all of you. So if I get any debugging emails, it'll just go straight to spam. So don't bother contacting me again.
We'll just show up
for Istio.
We'll show up at your house. How about that?
Sure. Okay. That's fine. If you made the trip that far, yes, that will be fine. Yes. But yeah.
Sure. Why don't you take the opportunity to tell people what you really think of them?
About No, it was actually. I think I don't know if Dan Berg is actually here, but I think he's probably the only one here who he and I go back like 5-6 years back in this entire space. But yeah, it's been a wild ride, and I still remember the very first time we presented Amalgamate to Eric Brewer, and I don't know who else was actually on the call. Like maybe Lou, Ryan, and Sven were on the call, but this was like 3 years ago or 4 years ago. And then we did the whole Istio thing and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's been a fantastic ride and a lot of learning. But I kind of also got bored. So I wanted to go do something different.
Yeah, Sven's pretty boring. I blame it on Sven.
Well, your contributions have helped the community a lot, Shriram. So thanks for all the work.
Thank you, Shriram.
Hey, Raj, you're breaking the first rule of like farewells.
What is that?
Don't be thankful for anything. You just give them a hard time the whole time.
I think if I was in Hawaii and drinking some good drinks, I will be in the same mood, Len. Sorry, Louis.
7 a.m. We need at least another hour before starting.
Yeah, I got another hour before I start my second Mai Tai.
Neeraj, you were supposed to give hard time to Sriram, not to Louis.
He's doing fast. He's good. No, this is good. This is helpful.
Yeah, it's difficult, but yeah, I'll do it on Slack. I'll give you a hard time.
Yeah, Shram, it's been a pleasure. We've been working together for a long time in this project. You've made huge contributions to it, so we're all really thankful for everything that you've done. And you're not really going to be allowed to escape. I'm sorry. I'm going to ensure that personally. So yeah,
I will be around, just not in the full official capacity. So do please make sure to remove me from all the org admins. I think I have admins on the drive and the GitHub org and a whole bunch of other things. So it may be prudent to remove me before somebody hacks it and then an unused account. So
before you get really upset at everyone and just start wrecking it.
Nice.
Well, when you move all your design docs over to a new Google, account, you're going to get like 1,000 notifications. Penance.
Yeah. No, it's all going to be going to some folder that will probably never check. So that's my strategy. I told that to Mandar. Do not reach out to me. I will block you on a messenger and whatever it is that people are going to use.
Especially if Mandar, I agree.
Yeah.
But hopefully you still remember us. Sure. We're running.
Yeah, no,
he's going to block us on Facebook, Twitter, right? I mean, he's going to shade us in the street, like all of it. Like totally.
I no longer have to do Twitter. That's nice, actually. That is nice.
Doesn't Mandar already suffer from the fact that there is a GitHub handle close to his name and that person receives all his notifications?
Yeah, let's redirect it all there.
I'm pretty sure that guy is going to be very angry. Yeah.
Oh, I've seen some very angry comments on GitHub from him.
Oh, all right. But yeah, it was fantastic working with you guys. And do please stay in touch. And yeah, I'll still follow this project from far. But yes, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your contribution to the project.
Thank you, Shram.
Guys, thank you.
Also, you're dead, but thank you.
Yeah, can you get off the call now? I mean, seriously. I mean, this is
seriously, because this is just, I can hear my own echo. It's just very bad, actually.
There is that remove from meeting button. I'm very tempted to just click it.
Yeah, I don't know why. I'm going to change the iPhone. So, yeah. Bye, guys.
Well, best of luck.
Thank you.
All right, so we're...
Oh, wow, he really dropped off the call.
Well, he's like...
Why would I waste 50 minutes on us?
I'm so hurt.
I'm so happy we recorded this.
Yeah, good that this was recorded. This will be for posterity.
Alrighty. Release blockers. Now that Shriram is not a release blocker.
So we have 4. Wait, what is our timeline? Someone remind me of our timeline for 1.8. Where are we in the
10th November?
Right, but like, sorry, I meant like are we already at code freeze or when's code freeze?
So feature freeze is happening 10/20, which is Monday, and the testing is starting Tuesday, which is 10/21.
Okay. Okay, so so Monday, like Monday.
Yeah.
I think that Tuesday is the cut, right?
Oh yeah,
And
Tuesday.
they would say that it's the community testing.
Oh, so people can work on Monday. Great. Okay, so what are the 4 blockers we have? Did you want us to go through those? Shweta, what did you want to cover on this?
We don't have an ETA, so it's good if we can discuss a little bit, at least on the release blockers, because Peter is going to clean up the P0s, but the release blockers, absolutely.
And John just said that the second and third ones are the same? Or which ones? Sorry, was that John?
Yeah, the second and fifth one are the same bug, so
okay.
We really only have 3 release blockers.
Line 2 and line 5 are the same?
Yeah, line 2 and 5.
Okay. So are these all... Are any of them missing assignees, Shweta?
Peter was looking into it. Peter, do you know?
I think they are all. Oh, actually no. 2 of them are missing assignees. Like the SDS bug, like the line 2 and line 5 are assigned to William. And I think Envoy change is in progress, so I don't worry too much about those two. But the second one, and the CRD regression, I don't think it's assigned to anyone. So we need to find a assignee. I think Jason is CC'd on it. Yeah. So
didn't
maybe,
Jason work on it in 1.6.8 or something? Jason Mong.
so should we just assign this to Jason? I will ping Jason offline and see whether.
See if he has cycles to look into it.
Okay.
Does anybody else wants to take it in the meantime, maybe?
So I mean, this is not a very detailed report. Yeah, maybe let's have Jason look into it and see if it's actually a release blocker and what's going on.
Yeah. Okay. And this the other one is the adopt tracer configuration. I'm not sure whether it's a regression or not, but I mean, John, you mark it as a release blocker, so maybe you can take a look at it.
Yeah, I can do it, or it's probably not a hard fix if someone else wants to pick it up. I think I'm kind of committed on a fair amount of release blockers already.
Should we assign it to someone else from your own group? Or I can take a look at this.
Peter, we should, like, someone from the telemetry side should take it. Then.
I will take it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will clean up all the P0s. Lots of P0s are long-term work and can be removed from this sheet. And I think by the new of today, we will have a better look, and I will pin each individual assignees of those P0s to get an ETA.
Sounds good. Okay. And also a call out for the testing.
Yes, please. It's always a struggle to actually chase first to sign up. So since it's starting Wednesday, I really appreciate if I can get some sign-ups, please.
So this is, okay, so we have, like, nobody signed up for anything yet?
No.
Okay. Yes, please.
Also, it would be, so, and if we can, I don't know, try to get at least 5%, 10% of these needs automation to actually get automated. It's another thing which you're not able to achieve. The test automation.
Especially ones that are like P0 or P1, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so if people could pick those up, your efforts will be eternally rewarded. We have prizes, Shweta? We need prizes. Or do people have other ideas for how to get more people to help with both testing and with automating of the tests? I think we have this perennial problem of being unable to get enough people. Thoughts from TOC members?
I think we're going to have to do a lot of testing, Sven.
Yeah, I mean, do we do any Twitter or external messaging other than the calendaring things that we have done in the past?
We do announce on Slack and discuss, but I don't think we do that on Twitter.
We normally also announce at the community meeting, but it's been canceled for the last 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try to do some Twitter messaging and see if that helps. But I agree with Louis. Mostly we will have to do a lot of testing.
Yeah, now that Shreyam's gone, we need somebody else to call Louis Lewis.
Sorry.
I can. This is Christian. I can jump in and help on this release testing, and then we can also make announcements.
I'll make sure I get a couple of these automated.
Yeah.
at least a couple.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I'll sign up too.
Thank you, Neeraj.
All right. Do we need anything on? Oh, you guys are working on dashboard. Do you need to review any of these things? Shweta, the issue health?
No, that should be good. The dashboard is coming along well. Once we are ready, we'll share it.
Okay. All right. So we did Shrim's announcement. Before we dive into authorization support, I wanted to go through a couple quicker things. So that Nico was signed up to be one of the release managers for 1.8. He's leaving our team and is no longer going to be release manager for 1.8. So I think Peter was going to replace him. Was that right?
No, I was released. One of the release men. Yeah, original one release man. Yeah.
Was going to replace him. He told me. Now I forget. I should have put that on here.
Did you mean 1.8 or 1.9, Sven?
1.8.
No, 1.8. We were 3 people for 1.8. Greg, Peter, and Nico. Nico leaving, we are down to 2.
Right. So, okay, so yeah. Should we just stick with 2? Are we okay with 2 for 1.8, or should we try to get something else?
3 is a good number. So I just pinged Nico, try to figure out who the backfill was.
Yeah, especially at the end stages, triaging, getting things done, 3 is good. We probably don't need them in the beginning, but in the late stages, it's good to have 3.
Okay. Okay, let's follow up on that. Is there anything else quick on this before we dive into the authorization support questions? So I'm going to put something about pro infrastructure. Nobody, if you had something in agenda, please put your name on it, by the way. I don't know who added this one, but now we don't know. Okay, let's go into better authorization support then.
Yeah, thanks, Sven. I will present.
Okay.
Hey, Aaron. So this is a design proposal from the security work group about having better and first-class support of the external authorization in the authorization policy. And we bring this up in the TOC meeting to resolve. So first to review the design and also resolve many issues arise in the review process that might need input from the TOC and other working group to help make the decision and approval of this design. So a very quick background is that many users today, they are using Envoy external auth filter to integrate their custom authorization system. And in Istio, they do this by using the Envoy filter CRD. The big pain points of using Envoy filter to do things like this is very obvious. Some of those things are related to the general difficulty in using Envoy filter. Some of those things are specific to the external auth process here. For example, the pipe character is invalid to be used in the external auth gRPC client, but that is the default cluster format we generate in pilot. And also the Envoy filter is generally hard to use, not only because of the syntax, the transparent nature, it's also because of it's exposing the native Envoy filter API. So whenever a small change in the upstream Envoy API, it could cause the user-applied Envoy filter to fail. Sometimes it will fail silently. For example, we have seen many users complaining that the version of the object in the Envoy filter is dependent on the version of Istio is using, and this was a huge pain. So additionally, the other big pain point in using the XOC flow is that it currently cannot support to trigger the XO flow conditionally. You have to enable it either for all of your requests or you disable it. Even technically, it allows you to use the per route override to fine control the triggering rule, but practically it is very, very hard and mostly impossible to use because of the complexity in dealing with the routing rules that is already generated by Istio. The goal, yeah, feel free to interrupt me if there are any questions.
Yangman, quick question here. So do you want DOC to resolve a particular issue, or do you want us to approve the doc? I'm just trying to understand if you have to go through the entire thing or we can focus on a subset here.
I think it's if TOC approves this design, it means we resolved the questions and concerns from about this doc. It's unfortunately costing is not here because I think he brought up most of the concerns that requires the resolve from the TOC and other networking group.
Got it. And you are targeting 1.8 for this or 1.9?
Previously, this is targeting 1.8, but for now, I think it will most likely not in 1.8.
Okay, got it. Yeah. No, carry on.
Because
Thanks.
next week is code cut. Yeah.
If I can try to skip ahead a little bit and summarize. So this is basically the same API as Mixer's check API in a sense, right? It's forming the same place in Istio where you can say, you know, or like the external check APIs, right? It's like when this match occurs in this situation, please call this service to check if this action is allowed.
Is there cacheability, Sven?
So
no, there is no cacheability in the XDOT APIs as of now.
So I was going to say, in theory, this is cacheable because we have existence proofs of us having done caching on similar APIs in the past. But
nice.
The current one is not to cache it.
So every request will have an inline out of process call. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to call out that we only send the header to the external server. We do not send the body and the payload.
Yep.
Yes, I think the network cost is the problem here. I'm assuming with board payload, yeah, it can get worse.
Yeah, the network overhead, right? Even with small payloads, right?
Yeah.
An external call has a pretty high cost.
But it's no worse than using the Envoy XOZ filter now, right? There's nothing but improvement.
Customers using the XOZ filter, they're getting this cost already.
Right.
Yeah. This doesn't change how it works under the hood. It just changes how it's configured by the user, mostly. Although it makes it conditional. Very important.
Yeah.
So I guess I can. So do you have anything other to add as well?
No, I think we should go through the API proposal.
So
which is
let me. Yeah, sure. So let me jump to the example and give a review of the API we are actually making here. So first of all, it's a prerequisite that the user they should deploy the external OC server either within the mesh or out of the mesh. This is just some examples for one of the deployment type. For example, the user can deploy the external server in the Istio system namespace, and they expose this server to Istio by defining the Kubernetes service. And then they can use the peer authentication policy to enable mutual TLS for the connection to the external OC server. And they can also use the authorization policy to only allow the ingress gateway to talk to it, because we will later apply the external policy on ingress gateway. next we move to the real.
I mean,
I have a
yeah.
That's provisioning the x.z server as an example, right? Mimicking what we would expect a customer to do. And part of the reason why you would maybe put an authorization policy on traffic into the x.z server, right, is because you want to prevent it from being abused.
Yes.
Although that's probably not that typical a use case, right? The other parts, like setting up the traffic policy in, right, almost certainly makes sense because you want to identify the workload that's calling you, right, when you're the authorization server.
Yes.
And you might use a different credential type, right? It might not be MTLS that you use here, or you might use MTLS and you might use something in the credential payload to act as an identity.
Yeah.
And to be clear, user, you mean the system admin, because that's one of the main issues. We have the mesh admin, the ones that is installing Istio and or managing Istio, and then you have the book info user who's actually deploying book info. Which user is deploying the OZ server?
So if you are already trying to do this in Istio system namespace, it should be the mesh admin's responsibility to do this, because book info, like the namespace admin, they should not have control over the Istio namespace in the first place.
Okay, so the mesh operator is operating the OZ server, deploying, installing.
Generally speaking, we would expect that like either security admins or platform admins are managing these services and configuring the access control to those and the authentication method supported by them. We should not expect individual namespace owners to be doing that.
And exactly, Sven, and what's the tie-in to Istio system here? Is that just an example namespace, or it has to be Istio system?
That's just an example.
Yeah, it's just an example.
So it's like tracing okay. or CA or any other systems that we integrate with.
Got it.
Perfect.
Yingman, I thought you mentioned somewhere though that it's common for, like, this is for Ingress example, but it's common if you have like your book info to have the book info team deploy their own auth server.
Yes, so this is one example of the deployment. As a namespace owner or a namespace admin, you can of course deploy your own extra OC server in your own namespace and configure your workload in your namespace to use that extra OC server. And this is just like you can apply all the other Istio API in your namespace to control the workloads in your namespace.
So what is the reason why that use case is common?
That is not common. I think the most common use cases for XOC and like the job is use it on Ingress gateway.
No, not the use case of whether it's Ingress or Sidecar, but the use case of the namespace owner owns their own auth-z service.
That's very rare. I have not seen those.
And dangerous, and something we should not recommend because you do not want book info to manage.
That is something like.
Do you have any customers that are doing that with X.z filter today? Where the namespace admin, like a service owner, is writing their own external auth-z. Like, do we have examples? Do we have examples of users doing that?
So, I think this is not something we are recommending users to do, but it's just like if the organization they have their namespace admin.
Yingman, my question is, do you know of users who are doing that today?
No.
Okay.
So we should not try to take additional overhead on our side on the API and implementation, in my opinion, to support that use case as of today.
To clarify, I mean, we support unofficially running your own tracing, CA, whatever.
We're not talking about tracing. I'm talking about external.
No, it's the same pattern. It's the same pattern. Someone can run their own tracing server or in their own namespace, and we have some ways to configure it if you choose to. But it's not something that we expose in the APIs.
Yeah, it's not in the API. We do not see anything specific about the deployment type in the API.
And we are not going to document it. Okay.
Right. So I guess they're like without an example of a user needing to override, let's say, right. So there are kind of three things, right? The mesh wide admin could say there is one auth-z policy server for the mesh, one X auth-z service for the mesh, or they could say there are many, right? Because and I don't know, have we seen any use case where companies or users have more than one XDoc service?
Only for migrations, just like you'll do it for JART.
Yeah, I think that's certainly typical. So I guess there's a question of how we might allow for migrations. Obviously, by not allowing this inline in the API here, something else has to fulfill that role elsewhere. Config, right, would be the obvious.
But we have a pattern for that. I mean, we have these patterns that we use for every other service we integrate.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just trying to point out that that pattern is mesh config, right?
It's proxy config, really, but yeah.
Yeah, something other than our first class APIs. Yeah.
Well,
it's in proxy config because it needs to be deployed in each sidecar, and it's that's how it is. I mean, tracing CA and other things are in proxy config.
Well, this doesn't need to be written out at injection time. It is produced solely out of the control plane, so I'm a little surprised to say it's in proxy config, but okay.
It is in the injection time because the sidecar needs to connect to this server, so it needs to get this address, and that's the only way to get the address today. We can have a default if we want, but
so you need to restart your workloads.
What?
Today for tracing CA and other things, you need to restart the.
Those are in Bootstrap, though, Austin. This is not
true. We can take it offline. That we can improve it.
No. Hang on. It's important here. There's going to be breaking changes for people and upgrade costs. I think if you put it in proxy config, they will have to roll their workloads. You should start with mesh config.
Yes, we could put it in mesh config if we want to.
And that's strictly better, right, Austin, from a lifecycle perspective, if we can.
If it's in mesh config default, we don't have to restart the pods every time we change proxy config, really. It's just if we want to restart them for some things. But even proxy config changes, many of them are actually enforced by pilot and sent in configuration. So it doesn't really make a difference. But yes, to clarity, we can put it.
That's more about the schema than behavior, right?
Yeah.
Okay. When we say mesh config, what we really mean is all the config, central config artifacts read by pilot, right, to manage the control plane, and proxy config are all the things that we inject because we have to.
Yeah, as long as it's consistent with the rest, I'm happy. It doesn't matter where it is. I want to be consistent with other integration points that we have. Yeah,
we have other API usability issues there, but we can take those separately.
We need to be a little bit more concrete about what we're actually talking about putting in where, right? Like, what would we put in mesh config? Presumably, we would not put all the rules about when to apply this, right?
No. The address, the parameters, the port, like we do for for tracing. Tracing is a perfect example. You deploy Jaeger, and then in mesh config you specify the address of Jaeger, you specify the port, you specify the TLS settings, and whatever else is necessary to connect to Jaeger.
Just the producer's settings.
We're talking about being able to define the available external OSI services as part of mesh config. I just want to make sure that everyone understands what you're talking about.
Specifically, it's a service reference.
Yes, and we probably should allow multiple for migration use. But we have to allow multiple.
Yes, absolutely.
When you say multiple, Sven, then you have to have a selector to specify which workloads will choose what at the global level.
So I think we still want authorization policy to define when to use which one, and then it would be name reference based. So an authorization policy would say, use this server for these workloads.
And maybe what we could do is we could make sure that we could add that capability later without disrupting the API and start with one.
That's totally reasonable.
CA integration is kind of the same thing. I mean, we have only one CA that we integrate, either Citadel or external CA.
The field still should be an array.
Well, if you don't need to specify it, there doesn't need to be a field, right?
It's a default. I mean, if you have a default.
Right, that's the nice thing about, right, we should be able to do this in a disruptive way. So we should be able to design, like, if we have multiple, what would the schema look like in the future? And what could the schema be today if we only had one? And if the change between those two schemas is only additive, then that's good, right?
Yeah, that's
so
reasonable.
In only one case, Louis, are you assuming that this would apply globally, or that would still be rules defining when it is applied?
So we already have a mechanism, right? If this is in mesh config with revision, to migrate. So we'd cover the migration case today with that. The only other thing then is something more fine-grained than migration.
Right. So does this have to be called everywhere, or can it be called, say, only from ingress gateway?
No, that will be the authorization policies, external. I mean,
That's the condition in the policy, right?
Right. Okay. You're saying we would still have that. It would just say external, and the meaning
exactly.
is purely in mesh config.
Yes.
So basically, like moving this part to the mesh config, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So mesh config is just service discovery. That's how I think of this. A global service discovery, and
so
bindings are through fine-grained APIs.
I see. So
you may want to add control over the headers, right?
Yeah.
Right,
so that's the additional config. In addition to the address of the target, we have some other finer control here over like what headers to be sent to the extra server, and what headers the extra server can modify in the original request, because the modification part is often needed in many advanced auth flow today, like the OIDC flow. It's controlled by, currently this is still in this auth policy, but I will just use this as an example here. It should just work if we move all this part to the mesh config, and we only keep this external action and the roles to trigger that behavior in runtime.
So one comment here, if you deploy a particular OZ server, that OZ server will have some particular behavior, I mean, what supports, what headers it supports. So typically it will be the system admins, the mesh admins that deploys the OZ server that will know what headers need to be forwarded and what headers should be returned. It's not booking for developers that needs to know that.
Yeah, so
this
is a part of this, right? This, I mean, the option we are talking, like not demonstrated here, is like moving this whole part to mesh config, right?
Okay, perfect.
Hang on.
Well, let's discuss that for 1 second, right? So generally, I agree, Custom, but usually what you would see, for instance, is the headers that were dealt with at ingress would differ from the internal ones.
Yeah. And mesh config doesn't feel like the right slot to go at that level of granularity, in my opinion, at least.
My concern was that authorization should not necessarily be involved in header manipulation, and someone who writes an authorization policy should not be concerned with what headers particularly are used in what way. It's a very arcane thing.
I agree. I think that usually divert, like you have one concrete set for internal and one concrete set for ingress. The admin could set both.
Then I'm happy. Doesn't matter where. I mean, I'm happy either.
And we have to think about how we would do that.
They can do a system-wide, mesh-wide policy, right? So
I don't think authorization policy exists right now in that capacity.
Yeah, just a random proposal. Can we instead of putting in mesh config, can we actually have a global CRD, like a global authorization policy or external authorization policy, and just apply this? We can use the same protocol as the authorization policy.
Well, we already have, Liman, we already have a global.
Yeah, I know, but this is a little different, right? We don't want to apply at namespace level, so we cannot just restrict saying namespace has to be Istio system. And
sure, mesh config can inject any system. It's not a problem. Mesh config can inject any address, including external addresses.
Yeah, I just feel we are putting too much things in mesh config. Like mesh config is becoming giant stuff. Like it contains everything, and it's hard to.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a different story. I mean, we need to improve mesh config, but not by putting mesh config in, spreading the mess in all APIs.
I think, and Louis, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, we should start simple. Most of the use cases that are going to come across are going to be ingress enforcement. Let's start with global service discovery in mesh config and the bindings and the auth headers that you need in the API, in the authorization API, and you can bind it to ingress. If the feedback is no, we need defaults for that. We can do that additive.
I'm not sure that we actually need defaults, given that all the policies are additive. The admin can always put whatever policy they want and expect it to be enforced globally. Ingress is like it's a sub-admin thing, right? If it's managed infrastructure, so they can control there too. So I don't know if we need custom. While I buy your argument about standardization for sure, I don't think having the API actually represent the information presents a problem.
So it does, because it's a bleed over for the internal things where you won't be using it for east-west workloads.
Yeah,
but then there would be no global policy, right? And the ingress admin would just put it in the ingress namespace, and they would do exactly what they wanted.
I just want to mention, ingress is the majority use case, but I think I did see some use case that's not limited to ingress. It's probably all the sidecar talk to it.
Oh, having ability to modify dynamically headers is super useful for networking in general. I mean, I'm sure we'll find use cases.
I think let's separate that part out, right?
Yeah, we can discuss later. So do we?
This is an authorization call, right? This is check, which yes, it can also modify headers, but it can. It's like maybe we should we consider trying doing something simple for now and then think about how to make this a more generally powerful thing rather than narrow on this use case.
That's where I was going, right? So I think Youngmin was highlighting those pieces, which feels like we don't have any controversy putting it in mesh config right now. Right? So, but the real controversy is just the authorization request allowed headers, where they belong.
Youngmin, does your document capture what you would consider to be the primary use cases?
Yes, so the example is actually the primary use case. So we have 3 examples here. The most and the fundamental basic example is just use the extra server to make a allow or deny decision. This is example 1. And you can also use the gRPC to talk to your extra server. This is just a variant.
A use case in the business sense, right? So I'm the owner of the ingress, and I want to ensure that when traffic comes into my network, blah happens. I'm the owner of a service, and when traffic comes into my service, I want blah to happen. And I'm the admin of a mesh, and for all traffic in the mesh, I want blah to happen, right?
So currently the model is that the API itself doesn't control who can apply this. So if the mesh admin or namespace admin, they have the necessary permission, they can apply the Istio API to the workload under their control.
Amen. You're not answering Louis' question. He was asking for use cases, business use cases. What are users trying to do with this feature?
Yeah, so the first one is use it to integrate the third party OC server that can do some customized check of the request. The other use case is it can be used to integrate with OIDC flow by specifying the external OIDC proxy or your server, and also by allowing that server to modify the headers in the original request.
So Youngmin, that's the how.
So
right, because the why has a lot of impact on the shape of the API. Right. If there was no mesh-wide admin use case for this, then we wouldn't put things in mesh config, or we would put very little in mesh config. If there was only an ingress use case, then we wouldn't bother trying to make mesh-wide default management for mesh admin a priority in the shape of the API.
I think it is mainly used on ingress gateway. I'm not sure what else is
so,
not.
Yeah, man, another way to ask this question is why are we adding this at all? Right? What request led to this being added? Because we're not just doing this for fun, right? We're doing this because users have needs.
Right? I think let me try to help here. So I've seen. Hey, Costin, do you mind muting? So I think I've seen a lot of requests come in where users are trying to configure Envoy's external filter because they want enforcement at ingress, where they want to consult an external system for authorizing the services, just like they want to consult an external server for doing JWT verification, right? And they fail miserably when using Envoy filters. So this is creating a first-class API to support at least that use case. Now, Yangmin, you might have more use cases where people have asked, I want to enforce it on sidecar workloads, but I have not.
Yeah, the primary use case is just like Niraj said. It's use this to improve the overall user experience when you are needing the extra OC on ingress gateway. And the more detailed like case is like you want to integrate your like a OIDC flow, or you want to integrate with maybe whatever like OPA or whatever your extra authorization server. And that's just like the JOT use case on ingress gateway. You delegate this work to Istio to do the JOT authentication or do the like external OC, and then you can like kind of like dedicate this like logic to Istio.
Yeah, I'm going to now counter myself and say that even though the JART authentication is also primarily used for ingress, there are emerging use cases right now where sidecars need that enforcement, and our APIs being flexible is helping us.
Especially since Istio is moving to JOT pretty aggressively.
Yeah, so we should think about that logical extension even if users are not asking for it now.
But part of authentication API, if possible, because OIDC is we already have an API for OIDC, and that was one of my concerns that we are putting.
So, what API? I mean, we do not have API for OIDC, right?
We do have authentication API. I think it has support for OIDC, no?
No, we don't.
No.
Well, should it? Right?
The JOT policy does have.
So I think it would be good to try to separate the use cases that are authentication from the use cases that are authorization. It might be that the right answer is still a single API call for optimization and performance reasons, but like we should at least make that decision based on data. So it'd be good to know, like, do we actually think we need to have authentication use cases separate? Could we actually do all the authentication in Istio rather than forwarding it externally? Do we need to do that? Or like that part needs to be thought through separately from the authorization use case.
Yeah, I think I take your point, Niraj, right, that sometimes we have to integrate with infrastructure that is mixing auth Z and auth N in one or Z, and that's not really our choice, right? We don't get to control that. So we have to be somewhat accommodating of that. I think that's reasonable, and we should aim to achieve that. Even if we would have, like, if we can process OIDC flows in a like, we would still have an API to process industry standard authentication flows, right? Including things like external group resolution that we do today, right? But that plenty of people have bespoke stuff. There's not much we can do to do, right? We can't force people not to have that, so we should accommodate them.
To argue against myself a little bit, it is nice to have a very general purpose thing that is just like do a chemist check, right? Like, sorry, a mixer check. Call this thing, pass it some stuff, get the results back, and like include that, right? And then that thing is very powerful and can be used for lots of use cases, and doesn't require us to continually iterate on our APIs every time a new use case comes up.
Yeah, I think there was one typical use case is for the RC token exchange on Ingress, which is actually well accepted by several by the community. So basically, we are going to get all the request context from the incoming request on Ingress, and then compose internally used with what we call RC token, request context token, and use it in the mesh.
So it didn't seem like there was a lot of controversy, at least with starting out with one external service in mesh config, right, or in the runtime aspects of mesh config and proxy config. I'm not trying to resolve that question here. And there's a separate subject about whether we need to default the headers, whether they can be overridden, or whether we should just let them be defined inline every time.
What is the recommended thing? Or I mean, I think most of the headers are default and pretty standard for these. Is that reasonable to assume at this point?
I think so. They tend not to vary too much. So it could be a default with override.
I think the only concern I would have with that being defined, like what headers to send being defined in mesh config, is that then the mesh admin can change the behavior somewhat unexpectedly for everyone, but maybe that's okay.
Well, that would imply, right? You have the same implication like if they change the x.z service behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just I'm wondering if there needs to be a clearer contract between the admin and the namespace admin and the mesh admin.
So I think one of the issues that we're having here is that x.z is not a standard, but OIDC flow is a standard, and like rest of the ODZ stuff that we're talking about are like standard things, and now this is mixing standards with an escape hatch, and I think that that's where we are having these use case issues even, because escape hatch use cases, I mean, it's an escape hatch, it can have any use case, and then the specific use cases. So the way this has started is clearly that people are using x.z to do whatever they want, and we want to make it better. But I think now we're moving towards, let's actually create a real API to directly address those use cases. And so if we don't get to it like quickly, people are going to continue using x.z in like really strange ways.
Yeah. So Mandar, did we learn anything from Mixer that applies here in terms of like what the API should be for configuring and who owns setting things, like what namespace, what headers get sent?
So I mean, there are things that we need to do at kind of the low level of either defining which headers are like what is sent out, what context is sent out, but that's mostly on a lot of it is on the efficiency side of, and it's like mesh admin is fine to define that. You don't need individual like namespace or service owners to define it. So okay. I don't think we need to go deeper than that.
So we can start with this basically all being defined in mesh config in terms of that block kind of highlighted there, the external block saying, here is the external auth service. Here's the headers it takes, here's the headers it responds with. And then in the namespace admin, all they would say is, here's the match conditions called the external auth service.
Yeah.
Is that kind of where
if we want to allow for header variation, right, they could just create two bindings to the same x.z system in mesh config if we allow more than one in the future.
Yeah.
Yep. So I think we'll solve that API problem.
You can add to the API, right? Like you can always add authorization policy if you need to.
And we shouldn't try to solve the header munging problem right now through mesh config, but probably through the higher level API.
One comment, Bandar mentioned efficiency, said the word efficiency, and probably he meant also stability, scalability, and so forth. The Mixer had this wonderful facility to, cache some requests, so if the server goes down, it will keep, not failing, which relied on the fact that requests were independent or cacheable. So I think that would be pretty important to address, because one of the problems with Mixer recently drop Mixer was.
Right. So Costin, I mean, yes, we like I'm super aware of that, and we had excluded it from the x.z API, specifically to get customer feedback and then say that, okay, if x.z customers complain, then we will add the complexity. And it's been almost like 2.5, 3 years, and people have not complained. So it seems like, however people are using it right now, like no one has complained really. That's
okay.
Kind of the bottom line.
And yes, and also just to end one small point to Metas is that this flow is still improved by having the conditional triggering, because many users they are okay with like triggering the extra flow for all their requests today, and now they can fine tune this to trigger for the subset of the requests that are actually needed for the XORC.
So what is the delta, I mean, the latency cost of this? Because I know for mixers, that was the main thing we tracked. What is the delta between a request with or without this?
This is improving on the current users, right? The current users, they do not complain about this, and we know this is going to improve that further, right?
Mixer users didn't complain either. We still measure the latency impact.
No, Costin, there are two different arguments here, right? One is there a user need that needs better UX now? And then with that improved UX, how do you improve performance? But we don't have to solve both of them today.
If I can jump in, like a higher level, is that we keep comparing this to the Envoy filter solution, but I don't think we should compare it to the Envoy solution.
Sorry, John, you're breaking up, I think.
Is this better at all?
So far.
Yeah, so I don't think we should be comparing to Envoy filter because everything's better than Envoy filter. So if we keep doing that, we're going to have a bunch of horrible APIs. And I'm not saying this is one, but we should really be looking at it in isolation, I think. Is this an API that makes sense standalone? Like some of the parts, which we haven't talked about here really, but we talked about offline, about like the HTTP versus gRPC versus TCP, I think are clearly leaking weird quirks of Envoy config. And if we had actually just designed, what do we want authorization to look like without thinking about Envoy or Envoy filter, then I don't think we would have come up with this API. And like furthermore, like is this something that we want to support because we got rid of mixer policy and then now we're basically adding back mixer policy. So I want to make sure that we're not just doing it because this is better than the Envoy filter. So let's do it because now we're committing to it. We're going to be supporting it for years, et cetera. So
I think there's a couple things. Like certainly, John, I would agree with you on the HTTP versus gRPC stuff, right? If we have service declaration, like we already have all that information in service, right? Right. So we don't need to expose it in this API. Right. We know a port is gRPC. If you point to a service, it only has that port. You don't, right? It's going to be a gRPC service. That's what you should call, right? We should just rely on the existing service mechanism. Right, and that goes for timeout and other things, right? That would come in from destination rule on that service, right? So an XDOZ service is just a service, right? We have plenty of traffic controls for talking to services, as Yangmin just showed for the other parts, right? As for whether it's a good API, I think there's some interesting questions, right? I think we all agree that we need the ability for third parties to integrate authorization systems that are not ones that we provide. Right, that's pretty clear. Like we have very strong use cases for that. So I don't think we should, like, we should recognize that and we should try to deliver an API experience that covers that. And so, you know, we could provide maybe a better abstraction than we think the Envoy filter is providing, right? Or like, so we can work on that part. I think there's another question, which is, this is just one mechanism, right? That we know today, right? It's perfectly possible that somebody might have WASM filter, right? Custom code to do authorization that they inject. How would this API work with that use case when the only way to do that use case today is with Envoy filter? I think that's a good.
WASM was one of the big things that I was thinking of. Whether we want to support only WASM that does this or also WASM, I don't think it was really mentioned here, but it seems like there's a lot of considerations with WASM that need to be accounted for here.
Right, so there's an interesting discussion point about action, I guess, right? Because really the action literally means call an external authorization system, right? That we have a predefined relationship with.
So sorry, can I jump in real quick? Can we figure out next steps just because we're over time and actually I need to drop for
so are we all agree that we move this external part to the mesh config to simplify the OC API for now. So that's the
No, because I think the protocol stuff that you have should not be at that level. These needs to be repurposed a bit so that the service discovery and protocol are top level fields instead of you stamp it out for HTTP, gRPC and stuff like that.
Oh, so
but
in a different form, moved but in a different form. I mean, made consistent.
I think we need a design for what that looks like, and we need to iterate on that.
So we're fine with moving the semantic, but we still need to work on the schema.
To make it consistent, yes.
Mm-hmm. There's a debate to be had about header control.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, whether that needs to be more generic or not. So I think that's a detailed question to do in follow-up. And then John has a good question about, this is just one form of external. What do we think other forms of external might look like? And are we going to have specialization in the API in the future to do that?
So for enforcement, like whether it's implemented with an Envoy native API or a WASM, that should always, that's the problem that applies to almost all of the configuration we supply right now, right? So many things that we configure in mesh config tomorrow can be implemented in WASM by a custom filter. So we should think about it generically and not just for authorization.
Yeah, it's actually interesting that authorization policy is almost becoming like this catch-all of very extensive matching and then deriving some action. Like we added audit, which is in many ways related to security, but it's also logging. And now we're adding this external authorization server, which yes, it can be used for authorization, but people are also using it for token exchange, for all sorts of stuff. And then in the future, if we add WASM, that can obviously be used for anything.
Yeah, it is becoming a bit like a generic trigger API.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily bad, by the way, right? Like we have pretty good user feedback that it's a good trigger API for authorization use cases. Like people seem pretty happy with the API, right? Modulo feature gaps, but which is maybe an interesting paradigm to consider for the future of Envoy filter, right? Maybe instead of doing a whole bunch of matching in the control plane to try and figure out what to do, we just push all the matching down into the data plane, which is what this API does. Mm-hmm. Or you know, there's some reconciliation between those two, so the control plane can figure out if it can push, or if it can't resolve locally, then it pushes the decision down to the data plane. That's not that bad a paradigm, but.
Quick question off topic. We had a couple docs which were beta promotion reviews.
Yeah.
Next Friday seems kind of late to do that. When should we pick that up?
That's a good question. I presume the working group meeting on Tuesday is pretty focused on the release. I'm happy to show up. But basically, we just want TOC sign off. I think we can handle that offline.
Okay.
If you want to just whack-a-mole on Slack.
Okay, I can do that.
I think that makes sense. John, you had the other doc, right? Was that correct?
Yeah, it's for 1.9, so it doesn't matter.
TM1.
Oh, okay. Okay. So it's just your doc, right?
All right, sounds good. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.